I call myself an open-minded skeptic. I'm not a skeptic. A skeptic just says, I don't believe this. I don't believe this.
Right.
I don't believe this. In general, when I hear of a health claim, I'm skeptical. I want to see the evidence. Oh, will this help my seizures? I hear if I do a keto diet, it might help my seizures. Well, sounds cool. I might be skeptical of it. In fact, I was a couple of years ago, but then somebody shared the evidence with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's been shown in young people, old people. It really can, not always, but it can reduce seizures. Okay, so I was open-minded. I was happy to change my mind. I don't have a dog in the race. I don't really care whether red light therapy does or doesn't work to improve hair regrowth. I want to look at the evidence. If it's there, if it's supported, I'm not a skeptic. Now I'll get excited. So if folks approach what they hear with a bit of skepticism, but open-minded to the evidence, I think that will stand them in good stead.
Hey everyone, this is Jonathan Marx with GoToHealth. I hope you're having a wonderful day. We have a great show today on a topic that really is close to my heart, which is evidence-based medicine. And our guest is going to talk about how to distinguish the hype versus the evidence when you hear about medical claims. This is so important. There's so much on the internet, in multimedia, on what's working, what's not working. How do you tell the difference? Does a product or a service have a true claim behind it that's supported by evidence or not? We're going to be talking about the hype in healthcare and how to tell whether you're being hyped or not. Our guest today is Dr. Bobby Dubois, MD, PhD. He's board certified in internal medicine, trained at Harvard and Johns Hopkins and UCLA Medical Center. He's also got a PhD in health policy from Rand Graduate School. He's published 180 peer-reviewed scientific articles. That means other scientists reviewed the content of his articles before it was published and approved of it. He talks about what works and doesn't work in healthcare, how to improve the healthcare system, and how do we define value. He's got a podcast and a free newsletter and a website, which you can find at Dr. Bobby Evidence, drbobbyevidence.com. That's drbobbyevidence.com. He's also got a podcast called Live Long and Well with Dr. Bobby. And you can find that on almost any podcast network by just typing in Dr. Bobby. Before we get to Dr. Bobby Dubois, a request. If you like what you're hearing on our show, please give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you're listening to us. It helps other people find the show. Thanks in advance. So welcome to the show, Dr. Bobby Dubois. How are you today?
I'm doing great and looking forward to our discussion and sharing that information with your audience and then ultimately my podcast audience.
Good, great. So tell us about your background and how does it help you look at the topic of too much hype in health?
Yes, I've been focused on evidence-based medicine for decades. And what that means is that what does the evidence tell us about what works and what doesn't? I'm a physician, I'm a scientist, and I'm an Ironman triathlete. So I really try to focus on health and wellness. And during my career, during different phases of the career, I would summarize evidence and help patients get what they need and not what they don't need. So for example, about a third of back surgeries and hysterectomies and tonsillectomies are not necessary and are not appropriate. Puts patients at risk, pays extra money that the insurance company could better use to care for other patients. And so what I did in the early parts of my career is to develop very detailed evidence summaries, expert panels from folks all across the country and the world, and identify which type of candidates are really good for that expensive intervention and which ones perhaps were not, and then expedite the process for those that really needed it. I'm also a scientist. So everything I've done over the years has been peer-reviewed publications. So I'm a general internist. I trained at Harvard and Johns Hopkins and Harvard UCLA Medical Center, but I also got a PhD in health policy at the Rand Graduate School. And I published about 180 peer-reviewed articles. Now, these are not articles like mice articles or petri dish lab articles. These are what happens in people, who does better with the treatment, who doesn't do well with the treatment. And so I'm also a scientist, and I mentioned I'm an Ironman triathlete. I've done about 15 marathons and about 18 Ironman races. So that's been an important part of my life. So bringing those three pieces of the puzzle together, a couple of years ago, I was like, gosh, I'm pulling out my hair. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I don't have much hair left because I keep hearing all this hype. Oh, red light therapy will cure your fatigue. And oh, by the way, as you get older, your mitochondria are unhappy and we have a supplement to help you. And there's really no evidence to support that. So I decided I wanted to put together a podcast, which is called Live Long and Well with Dr. Bobby. Just put in Dr. Bobby and you'll find me. And I try to bring evidence to these common things. And I've had a lot of fun topics, everything from, is your morning coffee a good idea or a bad idea? Are there evidence-based ways to reduce your risk of cancer or heart disease? A fun one from a week or so ago was the 5-second food rule. When food drops on the floor, if you grab it within 5 seconds, is it safe? And what's the evidence for that? I have one coming out on microplastics, whether we should worry about that, organic foods, and whether it's worth the money. So I'm approaching really common questions, but purely from an evidence standpoint, which is different from a lot of kind of opinion-based approaches. That's a bit of a long answer, but tried to sort of explain the various pieces of the puzzle.
Good. So tell us the name of your podcast again so we can remember it.
It's Live Long and Well with Dr. Bobby. Great. But if you just put in Dr. Bobby on Apple or YouTube or whatever else, you'll find me. So it's pretty easy to find me.
Good. And your website is drbobbyevidence.com, correct?
That is the short version, and it's easier for people to remember. So yes, Dr. DR, no period, just drbobbyevidence.com, and then you'll find me. You can sign up for a free newsletter where I basically summarize the evidence on each topic that I talk about. People love it. It's about a page long. It's simple, gets to your email box about every week or so. And that folks might enjoy. Again, just go to my website and you'll have a chance to sign up.
Great. So before you mentioned you published 180 peer-reviewed articles. So for people who don't know what that is, what is a peer-reviewed article? What does that mean?
It's a really, really important question. So people might say, well, I have 100 articles. Yeah, they're all on your blog, or they're all in some, health magazine. Peer review is where scientific articles go that come out in the New England Journal, which I've published in, and JAMA, which I've published in, major journals. Peer review means that before an article is approved for publication, it's reviewed by the editor, which is no surprise, but then it's sent out to independent doctors and scientists to review the rigor of your work. Now, it's not a perfect process because when you write up an article, you may not put in some of the nuances that you probably could or should have. But it's a very important part of the process. So if somebody is sharing information and it did not get published in a peer-reviewed journal, I would be very suspect about its scientific validity.
Interesting. Okay. So peer review basically is where other scientists or professionals are reviewing the work for what? For accuracy, for completeness. What's the basis of that review so people understand that?
Yeah, very important. They're looking at the design of the study.
Mhm.
And they're looking at the statistics that you use to analyze it. They're looking at the data in your tables. And what often happens is people get over their skis. They have some interesting data in table 2, but then their conclusions really are not supportive of that data. They try to make too much of it.
Mhm.
So there was a recent article, and this was peer reviewed, that got a tremendous amount of headlines. Intermittent fasting diet causes heart attacks and death.
Wow.
And it was actually, this article wasn't peer reviewed. It was presented at the American Heart Association meeting, and it was a press release that came from the American Heart Association. So it's like, okay, this has got to be real.
Right.
But it was an unpublished study. It was an observational study, not an actual clinical trial. And I talked about it on one of my podcasts. Definitely not something to worry about. You can try intermittent fasting if you think it helps you. It's not going to cause you to have a heart attack.
Good. So tell us, why do you think there is so much hype around health and particularly wellness and longevity? Longevity is really like the hot topic these days as the baby boomer generation gets older. We're talking about longevity so much. Why is there so much hype? Is this all about profits?
Okay, so hype comes from many different directions. So when people think about hype, they think about the person selling something on late night TV, or in today's world, on a YouTube or Instagram or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
People should understand, absolutely, we're going to get into that type of hype. And that's, there's a lot of money being made in that area.
Yeah.
But the medical community also gets it wrong. So I'm old enough, you're old enough, maybe our listeners are old enough to remember when people said, don't eat eggs, don't eat shrimp, don't eat lobster. Eating cholesterol is bad for you because cholesterol gets into your heart and causes problems. But then, a decade or so later, they were like, oops, we got it wrong. Eating cholesterol isn't bad for you. Enjoy your eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Hormone replacement therapy is now back in the news. In the 80s, most women going through menopause took it. Then there was the Women's Health Initiative, which said, oh my gosh, women are getting breast cancer or stroke. Stop taking it. So we had 20 years or more of women being frightened by their doctors to not take hormone therapy. And the FDA just kind of reversed course very recently to say, no, you and your doctor should decide. It can be very helpful for many women. And then, we had the whole peanut thing. Oh, peanut allergies in kids. Don't expose your kids when they're young to peanuts. What that ended up doing is we created a generation of kids with a lot of peanut allergies. Now we realize, oops, you do want to expose them when they're young. Mm-hmm. So this is not unique to just the snake oil salesman, but there are some real reasons why people might want what they hear that could be hype oriented. The first is that there's a lot of symptoms out there that the traditional healthcare system isn't very good at solving. If you come in with chronic headaches or fatigue or tummy aches, oftentimes there isn't a good medical solution. So people are kind of primed to look for something else. So they go to the alternative medicine stuff. Mm-hmm. So if we as kind of traditional doctors could help these people, they may not be as open to some supplement that they read about, or a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, or IV magnesium, therapy you might hear about. So that's the first thing. The second is that there are financial motives. There have been snake oil salesmen for hundreds of years. In the old days, the snake oil salesman would have his covered wagon. He would go from town to town and he would sell you a potion or an elixir. So this has been around forever. Turns out it wasn't snake oil in most cases, but they said it was snake oil and it's hard to get. So it was very expensive. So people trying to make money off of this is very common. And then the last piece of the puzzle, why there's so much hype, is social media. Because historically, there wasn't such an easy audience. You know, it wasn't so easy to get this sort of opinion belief in the New York Times or your local newspaper. But now anybody can record a YouTube or an Instagram or have a podcast, and all of a sudden, a lot of people are aware of it. So I sat back and said, you know, there's actually an equation that speaks to this problem.
Interesting. So there's a way to figure this out, because what you're making me feel right now is I don't know who to trust. I don't know what to trust. Maybe, you know, traditional medicine is they're making mistakes. I mean, how do I know what's right? How do I know what's hype? Help us with that.
Okay, so let's start with the equation, and then I'll give the listeners some very tangible things that they can do to try to separate the hype from the reality.
Great.
Okay, so the equation is, if you start with a cool theory, oh my goodness, the reason that we lose energy as we get older is our mitochondria, and they die off and they're not happy. So that's a problem. And what we need to do is boost your mitochondria. Now, fill in the blanks, leaky gut, fill in the blanks, you know, some other supplement. So there's a cool theory, and it really makes sense that why you ought to do this. On the medical side, we used to think if you had blockages in your arteries, you're going to have a heart attack unless you get bypass surgery or a cardiac stent. Only later did we realize that you don't, that if you're stable and doing fine, treating the blood pressure and the cholesterol and all of that is just as good as having surgery. So a cool theory is part one. Part two is compelling anecdotes. Oh my God, I've been depressed forever and I've tried everything, but Dr. Jones's supplements really made a difference. Oh, and Sally also had a great response. So now we have a theory that gets you excited. Right. Now you have anecdotes that say it works.
Right. And anecdotes, by anecdotes, you mean people's stories that you've heard of success with this or that. It's just individual stories that you're hearing about. Got it.
And then there's the third piece of the equation, which is a credentialed expert. So if somebody like Dr. Mark Hyman says it, or Andrew Huberman says it, or lots of other people who just say they're an expert, all of a sudden you want to rush out and buy AG1 supplements or whatever else that they're suggesting is the way to go. So when you take a cool theory, combine it with compelling stories, and now you've got your credentialed expert, the problem is those three might excite you and make you buy something, but that is not evidence. That is not evidence. And so 99% of all of this you hear out on the web or on podcasts or wherever has that triumvirate of problems. But evidence is you tried something in people. Okay. Does melatonin improve sleep? Okay, good. Let's take 100 people that have sleep problems. Right. 50 of them, we're going to give you melatonin. 50, we're not going to give you melatonin. We'll give you a placebo, and we'll see who does better. Great. That's a clinical study. You know, a clinical study of hyperbaric oxygen chambers on people who had scuba diving accidents, it works. And if you have a diabetic foot ulcer, a gangrene, something that's not healing well, yes, studies in people show it works. The problem is that if you've got this expensive hyperbaric oxygen chamber, you want to make money. And so you sell it for cancer treatment or fatigue treatment or chronic pain treatment, because again, you've got a cool theory. You've got stories of people who do well. And that's the problem. Now we got to get to the solution, but that's the problem.
Right. Good. So we've outlined the problem very well. And you've mentioned this whole idea of clinical trials, which I always like to come back to, and evidence-based medicine. So in many ways, doctor, we are brothers in this, trying to get the right word out to people about evidence-based medicine. So in a clinical trial, let's describe the process of that so people understand more about this. I know we've talked about it before, but it really is worth repeating. Tell us about the process of a clinical trial.
A clinical trial, and any drug that's approved by the FDA will have had a clinical trial. If you ask the question, I wonder if wearing an Oura ring will improve my sleep, or a Fitbit, or Apple Watch. You want to do a clinical trial, and a clinical trial is the most valid way to answer a question. Often you see what are called observational studies. You'll look at a database that was already there, and you would look backwards in time and say, I wonder if people who exercised a lot lived longer. And so they go backwards in time, where there was a questionnaire saying, how much did you exercise, or how many eggs did you eat, or whatever it was. And then you look at people who did that or didn't do that and ask the question, I wonder if one group did better than another. Now, that is in contrast to a clinical trial. A clinical trial is something you do and march forward in time. And so you have a group of people you want to test this out in. I mentioned melatonin. It might be a new drug for cancer. It might be a new type of procedure to improve arthritis of your knee. So you bring together a group of people you would like to test this new thing in. Maybe 100 people, maybe 1,000 people, maybe 10,000 people. When Mounjaro and Ozempic and all of these drugs were tested for weight loss, they might have 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 people they brought together. Then you divide them into two groups randomly. You don't say, well, the old people go over there, the young people go over there. You randomly say, you go left, you go right, you go left, you go right. And you end up with these two groups, which we think are the same. They're roughly the same age, roughly the same number of women, roughly the same number of people who might also have high blood pressure, roughly the same number of people who exercise or don't exercise. Then you have a placebo and you have a real drug. Right. So nobody knows what they're getting.
And when you say nobody knows, the patient doesn't know and the researcher doesn't know.
Correct. Now, sometimes the patient doesn't know, but the doctor knows, but there are biases if the doctor knows. So we try to make them both blinded. Then you march forward in time, you measure whatever it is. If it's arthritis, it may be pain that the patient's having. It may be x-rays of the knee. It could be a variety of other things. And then you make the comparison. Oh, the people who got this drug, they felt better with their arthritis, and the x-rays look better. That's great. And the beauty of a clinical trial is you've randomized them. You've eliminated all the other reasons why people might feel better. And because placebo is a real deal, having a placebo drug, as it were, balances that out. So that's the best type of evidence that we are looking for.
Now, how can people know if something has evidence behind it, if something has been through a clinical trial? How can average folks who aren't clinicians know what actually's got evidence to support it?
That's right. And because 90+% of what you are going to hear on podcasts and such is really my equation of hype, not evidence. So where are folks going to find credible evidence? First, begin with a set of questions to ask of yourself, or if you're actually talking to somebody about it, who's supposed to know about it, ask these questions. Is there evidence in people, not in mice, not in a laboratory, in people where they tested out this thing that they want you to do? Secondly, is there a financial motive by the person who's talking about it? If there is, okay, I'm a little more skeptical. Does the person present it as black and white? This works. Or is it very nuanced? Well, it can help some people, but actually some people get worse. Somebody who gives you a balanced risk and benefit is more likely to be believed than somebody who has all these grand claims. Mm-hmm. Now, where specifically might you look? A lot of the questions people ask about might be food related, supplement related, will curcumin improve my cognitive abilities or whatever it is? There's a wonderful website called examine.com, and they summarize the evidence for, again, nutritional supplements and things like that. They do stuff on acupuncture and various other things. It's a good one-stop shop. They have a free version. You can pay if you want to get a slightly more advanced level, but it's a great way. They will give you a quick summary on melatonin and whether it helps people or it doesn't. That's a good place to start, and I often do that. I hope my podcast brings things to people in a balanced way. Mm-hmm. And by all means, send me an email. I love to get topics that I might do well.
Great.
So these are the kinds of things. Yes, you can go to like the Mayo Clinic newsletter or the Harvard newsletter, the Stanford newsletter. They all have these kinds of things. And that's pretty good for background information. But generally, you'll need to get something that's a little richer to look at the evidence.
Now, is there a way let's say with supplements, that I can test myself on what works or doesn't work? Do you encourage that? Am I the sample of one that should be reliable, or should I really be going to examine.com or looking at clinical trials to see whether something can work for me personally?
At the end of the day, as they say, it's all about me. Is it going to work in me?
Yes.
And absolutely you can. And I've been talking a lot about this on my podcast. They're called N of 1 studies.
Yes.
N is how many people are in the study. Usually you have thousands, but N of 1 means there's only one person.
Right.
You can objectively test things in yourself. Okay, let me tell you what you can't test. You're not going to be able to test a new type of chemotherapy in yourself to figure out whether it works or not. You're not going to be able to test it in yourself if it takes 20 or 30 years to know the answer. Oh, this nutritional supplement is great. It's going to reduce your risk of getting dementia. You can't test it because it's going to take 20 years. And by then, who knows? Mm-hmm. But things that happen relatively quickly, you can test in yourself. Melatonin in the scientific studies has been shown to reduce how long it takes you to fall asleep by 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's not a big number. But the reality is some people get no benefit. Some people get a lot more than the 5 minutes. 5 minutes is an average. Maybe you'll get 20-minute improvement in how quickly you fall asleep. That's really important. Mm-hmm. So test it in yourself. What does that look like? What it looks like is you need to have an objective way to measure things. So if you have an Oura Ring or a Fitbit or one of those, it will tell you how long it took to fall asleep, what the quality of your sleep was. But you can also do it through a questionnaire. There's a thing called the Pittsburgh Sleep Questionnaire, but basically asks, how long did it take you to fall asleep? Did you wake up in the middle of the night? Was it hard to go back to sleep? Did you feel refreshed when you woke up in the morning? And did you fall asleep in the afternoon because you were so sleepy? So you can answer these questions and get a number. So before I tried this, my score was 8, whatever it is. Then you try the melatonin. The good news is it's only going to take a few days or a week to know whether it works. Then you repeat your questionnaire or your Oura Ring and see if it got better. Now, we're not done because it could have been a placebo effect. You thought it was going to help, so it did. And placebo is very important, very well. I have a whole podcast on it. So you need to stop the melatonin, wait another week, and see if it gets worse. Restart the melatonin and see if it gets better. This on, off with an objective way of measuring it is the N of 1 study. But it isn't just unique to sleep. For example, you have high blood pressure and your doctor says you need to cut out salt in your diet. My wife and I, we love salt. If somebody said you have to give up salt, we would be very depressed. Turns out at least a quarter of people are not salt sensitive, meaning they can have all the salt they want. They can reduce the salt all they want. It's not going to change their blood pressure. And I happen to be one of those people.
Lucky guy.
So you could do the same thing. Measure your blood pressure for a few days. Then say, I'm going to try a low salt diet because my doctor said I should. Give it a couple of weeks. See if it made a difference in your blood pressure. If it didn't make a difference in your blood pressure, well, you're probably not salt sensitive. If it did go down, you could add the salt back and then see what happens. You can do this with cholesterol. Everybody's like, oh, I want to manage my high cholesterol with diet. Most of the time it doesn't work, but you can do the same exact thing. Do your blood test for your cholesterol, try a low fat diet, come back a month or 2 or 3 later, measure it again. And you don't even have to do it through your doctor. Your local Walgreens, you can get these types of tests. So you can do the whole thing by yourself, just like buying a heart rate, a blood pressure cuff. At the Walgreens, you can do your blood pressure assessment at home. So the N of 1 study is a way to test things in yourself where you can measure it and you get a kind of a change in things within, a week or 2 or a month or 2.
Right. Good. I love this whole idea of an N of 1 study where you can really test things on yourself. You don't have to be worrying about what people are saying on TV or on the internet or what claims are being made. You can do this kind of test on yourself.
It's very empowering for people.
I love this. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Great. So, doctor, are there questions that I haven't asked that I should have, or what kind of message would you like to leave with people today?
I call myself an open-minded skeptic. I'm not a skeptic. A skeptic just says, I don't believe this. I don't believe this. Right. I don't believe this. In general, when I hear of a health claim, I'm skeptical. I want to see the evidence. Oh, will this help my seizures? I hear if I do a keto diet, it might help my seizures. Well, sounds cool. I might be skeptical of it. In fact, I was a couple of years ago, but then somebody shared the evidence with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's been shown in young people, old people. It really can, not always, but it can reduce seizures. Okay, so I was open-minded. I was happy to change my mind. I don't have a dog in the race. I don't really care whether red light therapy does or doesn't work to improve hair regrowth. I want to look at the evidence. If it's there, if it's supported, I'm not a skeptic. Now I'll get excited. So if folks approach what they hear with a bit of skepticism, but open-minded to the evidence, I think that will stand them in good stead.
That's great. Dr. Bobby Dubois, thanks so much for being with us today to explain this. I really feel a brotherhood with you in terms of being evidence-based medicine and really getting the facts out about that. And I'm both glad we're doing the same kind of projection of information to the public to help people understand what's best for them. So again, if you want to learn more, you can go to drbobbyevidence.com. That's drbobbyevidence.com. And Dr. Bobby has a podcast called Live Long and Well with Dr. Bobby. And you can find that. Just put in Dr. Bobby in your favorite podcast network and you'll find him. Dr. Bobby, it's been so great to be with you today. We'll have to be in touch again. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Good. So as we say at the end of every show, this has been Jonathan Marx with GoToHealth, and we truly wish that you go to health. Thank you for tuning in today to Go to Health. You are one of almost 10,000 people per day who enjoy the evidence-based health information offered by our guest health experts. You can watch us on our website and YouTube and listen to us on 8 podcast networks. Be sure to join Jonathan Marx in our upcoming shows each week. If you like our show, Please share this episode with your friends and colleagues. You can subscribe to the show, join our email list, send us feedback, browse through the online store, and view our library of over 150 shows at GoToHealthMedia.com. See you next time, and remember to elevate your life with Go To Health.